I see a garden, I think of my grandmother who's currently battling cancer.
When I think of skiing, I think of my family friend who beat cancer.
Whenever I see pool parties, I think of my cousin who just got cured from cancer.
Every time I walk into my grandmother's house, I think of her.
Whenever I hear the song I Couldn't Ask for More by Edmund Kane, I think of our grandfather.
Every time I see a gray Camry, I think of my nano.
Every time I play ball or go, I think of my stepmom.
Every time I hear Neil Diamond, I think of my dad.
Christmas Eve reminds us of our cousin.
Tulips remind us of our Papa Joe.
Every time I hear my middle name, I think of my Auntie Lori.
Whenever I hear an Elvis song, I think of my Nana.
Every time I hear this song, it feels like home to me. I think of my stepmom. Every time I see Jason with his little brother, I think of his mom.
Whenever I see a pink ribbon, it reminds me of my mom and my nonna.
Whenever I see my little cousins, it reminds me of my uncle.
When I see a hairbrush, I think of my hairdresser.
When I see a Nerf gun, I think of my cousin.
Whenever I see a gray chair, I think of my grandfather. Whenever I see a painting, I think of my grandfather.
Whenever I see my backyard, I think of my cousin.
Every time I think of North Carolina, I think of my uncle.
Whenever I see pizza, I think of my dad.
Whenever I see the beach, I think of my aunt.
Whenever I see a clattering, I think of my nana. Whenever I see my cousin, it reminds me of my Auntie Kathy that died of cancer.
Every time I look through old pictures at my grandparents' house, I think of my two great uncles that passed away of cancer, Tony and Octavio.
Whenever I see the color purple, I think about my papa.
Every time I drive by the Capuccio's house, I think of Mr. Capuccio.
Every time I come home, I'm reminded of my mom.
Every time I see a butterfly, it reminds me of my grandmother. Whenever I think of construction work, I think of my grandpa.
Whenever I have homemade pizza, I think of my Nana.
Whenever I have lollipops, I think of my grandpa.
Whenever I think of Cy Tiny Park, I think of my great-grandpa.
Every time I think about Creative Arts Camp, I think of Patty Burns. Every time I see a black lab, I think of my uncle.
Every time I eat a pie or see someone sewing, I think about my grandma.
Every time I see a daisy, I think of my grandmother.